Hello and welcome to Insurance in Canada. I'm your host, Rick Pineda. Thank you so much for joining me. On today's episode, we are looking at three stories. The first one looks at Ontario's new auto reforms for accident benefits under their auto policies and how those who are no longer able to access those benefits could find other sources of compensation. Second article, we look at the recent hailstorms in Alberta and steps that can be taken to try and minimize the damage caused by hail. And our last article looks at the Insurance Bureau of Canada's call for a national commercial truck database. So without further ado, let's take a look at insurance in the news. Insurance in the news for episode 38 in 3, 2, 1. So our first article talks about the recent reforms to accident benefits to the Ontario automobile policy that took effect on July 1st. Some of the reforms made some of the coverages that used to be mandatory under accident benefits, turned them into optional coverages. Another thing that changed under the auto reforms is who qualifies for these now optional coverages that used to be mandatory, and that many people used to have access to these coverages. But now with the reforms that have taken place, the definition of who's an insured for the optional coverages as opposed to the mandatory medical rehabilitation and intended care have changed, which means some people who were able to access some of these coverages before might not be able to now. So some of the possible resolution for those people is what this article looks at. So let's take a look how those to be excluded from optional benefits will try to access them. Currently under Ontario's auto reforms, pedestrian cyclists and some passengers won't have access to optional benefits. How adjudicators could change that. Insurance defense lawyers expect claimants' lawyers to argue their clients are dependents under Ontario's new auto insurance reforms in a bid for excluded injured passengers, pedestrians, and cyclists to gain access to optional benefits. As of July 1st, Ontario is changing its auto insurance policies to convert several of its mandatory benefits, including income replacement, housekeeping, and death benefits, into optional benefits. The rationale is that Ontarians will now be able to opt out of many previously mandatory benefits in order to reduce their insurance premium costs. One flashpoint, however, is that optional benefits are now available only to named insureds on auto policies, including drivers, their spouses, dependents, and other regular drivers listed on the policy. And so lawyers are sounding the alarm that pedestrians, cyclists, and certain passengers, including children who are injured in car accidents, may no longer have access to optional benefits if they are not named in an auto policy, which is true. So right now, the only mandatory accident benefits coverage under an Ontario policy is medical rehabilitation and attendant care. So it covers all the expenses to recover from your injury, for rehabilitation from your injuries to try and regain a normal life, get back to work, as well as hiring someone to attend to your needs while you recover from your injury. That's what those coverage that's the medical rehabilitation and attendant care covers. So when I'm talking about the cost to recover from your injuries, I'm talking about the costs that the Ontario Health Insurance Plan wouldn't cover. So anybody who's involved in an accident with your vehicle, whether it be you, your spouse, dependents, other drivers, pedestrians, cyclists, if you run into a cyclist, pedestrian, they would still have access to medical rehabilitation and attendant care. It's all the other optional coverages that used to be mandatory, like I mentioned, income replacement, like home housekeeping care, home and housekeeping maintenance expenses, caregiver expenses, educational expenses, funeral and death expenses. Now only the named insured, their spouse, dependents, and drivers listed on their policy, on the named insurance policy, have access to those benefits. So if you were to hit a cyclist, and that cyclist is not your spouse, dependent, or regular driver, a driver listed on your policy, that cyclist would not have access to income replacement, would not have access to caregiver, funeral expenses, death expenses. So this is what the lawyers are trying to raise the alarm about. So that cyclist would still have access to cover all their medical expenses, rehabilitation expenses, but when it comes to income replacement, no, they would not have access to that under your policy. This, back to the article, the immediate change is really going to be pedestrians and passengers, the cyclists who have to claim accident benefits, and because the optional benefits are only payable to a very limited number of people, it's the named insured spouse, dependent, a regular user, or a listed driver. It's a listed driver, not a regular user. The regular user would have to be a listed driver under the policy. The people who don't fall into these categories are going to try and find a way to get into one of those categories. There's going to be a lot of room for people to try and make claims as a dependent, and those disputes, if it's just between a person claiming benefits and the insurer, are going to go to the LAT, the License Appeal Tribunal. So now the LAT adjudicators are being asked to deal with these coverage issues more often. Andrea Lim, a partner at Dutton Brock LLP, noted that injured pedestrian, cyclists, and passengers will still have access to mandatory accident benefits. Yeah, we talked about that already. What happens to an uninsured pedestrian or cyclist? The standard accident benefits will still apply to the uninsured pedestrian and cyclist. They will still have access to medical rehabilitation. But to access optional benefits, claimants' counsels will likely argue their clients are dependents in an auto policy. Predicted Lori Walker, president of Walker Consulting and Auditing, Case Law and Family Law, shows the definition of a dependent has become somewhat more elastic over time, particularly in an age of blended families and shifting parental roles and responsibilities. That's family law. However, the definition of dependent when it comes to the statutory accident benefits schedule is clear. That person would have to be financially or somehow other dependent on the named insured for support. So trying to somehow stretch that definition out to somebody who's a complete stranger to you, I don't see too many cases like that going to the LAT, just because any lawyer is going to have a heck of a time trying to prove that two strangers were somehow financially or emotionally reliant on each other for support when they've never met. But let's see what the rest of the article says. The dependent situation is where I think we're going to see a stretch. We will see it quite a bit when you have separated or divorced parents. Mom's got a policy, dad has a policy, and do we see care combined? Do either principally 51% in for finance or for care? While one parent might be the breadwinner and they meet the test under finance, they also meet the test for care under that policy. So can I be a dependent on both? And I don't see why not. I've seen court cases where somebody who's been living in the States, whose sibling lived in Canada, qualified for accident benefits under the sibling's policy, just because the sibling in the States was communicating with their sibling, and the LAT, the tribunal, determined that the person was emotionally supported by the sister, therefore qualified as a dependent. So, it's not just financial means is the sole factor in determining whether you're dependent on somebody else. There is that other care aspect. So this particular case that this person brought up regarding the separated parents, I don't see too many insurance companies is going to get nitpicky if one of the kids gets into an auto accident, whether we're trying to do this on the mom's policy or the dad's policy, just because maybe the mom's the one who has custody and the dad doesn't. That doesn't mean the dad is no longer a caregiver, or that the kids are no longer dependent on the dad. So I don't see too many cases going on like that. I think most people in the industry that have looked at these sort of situations are more concerned about the situation where a named insured strikes a pedestrian, a cyclist that obviously they have no relation to whatsoever. One policy for a parent may carry $65,000. That's it. That's all they could afford to pay for. My broker said this is the cheapest way to get to the policy, but the other policy might carry the full complement of things, including optional benefits. So we need to do that investigation. Sure, but if the other parent's policy has a higher limit, there's no reason why you can't apply for accident benefits with that other insurance company, since the kid would qualify as a dependent for the other parent's insurance policy that has a higher limits. Plus, the other insurance company receives the application first, so they are required to pay accident benefits under the policy. If they want to argue with the other insurance company, they can do so at a later time, but under the regulations, under SABs, the first insurance company to receive that application has to start paying out that accident benefits. So I don't think this is going to be, it's an interesting scenario that this particular article and this particular individual brings up, but I don't think too many people are concerned about that particular scenario, as opposed to striking the pedestrian or the cyclist that you have, or having somebody in your vehicle that you're not related to, a passenger in your vehicle that's not your dependent, not your spouse, not listed under your policy, and you get into an accident. What about that person's injuries, loss of income, the other expenses that they incur that your optional accident benefits would have covered, but they no longer qualify? That's where I think most people are most concerned with when it comes to these auto reforms. Now, keep in mind, just because the pedestrian that you struck doesn't have access to your income replacement doesn't mean you're off the hook. If you're liable for the other person's injuries, then the loss of income that the pedestrian suffered is still going to have to be compensated. It just wouldn't be compensated under your accident benefits. It would be compensated under your third-party liability. So yes, we focus on the accident benefits portion when we talk to our clients now, but these auto reforms, and it is something that you yourself, if you're an Ontario resident, should be educating yourself on, but also making sure that you have adequate liability limits as well to cover injuries that third parties suffer that now have to be covered under your liability, that because it qualifies to be covered under your accident benefits portion. So it's going to be a while before we see the fallout from all of these changes. It just happened a couple of weeks ago, so it'll be interesting to see the court cases, the cases that go to the LAT, and the decisions that the LAT, the tribunal, and the courts will pass down because of these changes to accident benefits. Our next article deals with, I'm sure all you Albertans are all too familiar with hailstorms. So obviously hail is something that occurs all across this country. It's just certain parts of the country experience it more often and worse than others. We do experience hail every now and again in Ontario, but trust me, it's nothing like what they get in Alberta. This has become quite an issue in Alberta, especially in insurance in Alberta, providing coverage for hail, considering all the frequency of claims and the severity of claims, hail claims that occur in Alberta. So let's take a look at what this article, Alberta claims roll in some pointers to help clients avoid hail damage. Hail season is off to an early start in Alberta with a June 18th storm across the province's southern belt doing severe damage. Hail, heavy rains, and winds topping 100 kilometers an hour in some locations combined to bring down trees and inflict structural damage, according to news reports. Our team has received some hail-related claims in Alberta, says William Slade, Vice President of National Property and Contractor Connection at Crawford and Company. However, our primary response in the province has been focused on the recent flooding in Edmonton. He notes his firm has deployed resources across Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan to support the claims surge over the past few weeks. He adds provincial governments are responding quickly to arrange licensing for out-of-province adjusters, which is allowing for faster response time for deploying staff. Anticipating a heavy 2026 storm season, the IBC yesterday shared some proactive steps homeowners in the province can take to reduce insured losses over the past decade. Annual damage from hailstorm has totaled $8 billion. With the summer 2024 Calgary hailstorm alone racking up more than 130,000 insurance claims and $3 billion plus in insured damage, IBC notes in a press release yesterday that makes it the second costliest disaster in Canada's history, behind the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfires that cost about $4 billion in insured damage, which just goes to show you how serious an issue hail is. I know most homeowners across Canada are concerned about fire and water damage, whether it be a burst pipe or flood damage. But as you can see, hail can be quite destructive as well. So it's not something to, depending on where you live in the country, it's not something to be first and foremost in your mind, but it always should be a concern as well. These events have significant impact on the cost of insurance, and their human toll is growing as lives are disrupted and businesses are impacted for weeks following the storms. IBC has asked provincial government to extend retrofit incentives to homeowners so they can add hail-resistant materials to their properties. Also asked the province to mandate the use of materials during building construction. Use of hail-resistant materials can cut premium costs for insured, with IBC adding a majority of insurers will provide a home insurance savings up to 50% when hail-resistant materials are in place. Plus, during their use during building or renovating can result in lower deductibles and increased coverage options. Also, Alberta homeowner insurers can take precautions to reduce losses, including keeping an eye on weather reports. And when thunderstorms, which often bring hail, are forecast, worthwhile actions include parking cars in covered areas to reduce damage to windows and vehicles' exteriors, covering outdoor furniture and barbecues or bringing them indoors, clearing debris from eaves troughs so they drain properly. Many clients treat risk management as an annual renewal exercise effective year-round. It's been an active start to the severe season in Western Canada, with flooding in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, damaging gusts and hail from southern Alberta, and wildfires in British Columbia. It's important to residents that they take preventative steps to prepare for the unexpected and help mitigate potential damage to their properties. So yeah, when it comes to the vehicles, obviously the best defense when it comes to trying to prevent hail damage to your vehicle is obviously not to leave it outside. Obviously, that's not an option for everybody, especially in the prairie provinces where the hail situation is more of a concern. But when it talks about the building hail-resistant materials, when it comes to building properties, it's going to be the roof covering materials is going to be one of the bigger factors to consider. There are, if you're going to be using shingles, there are shingles, I believe they're called Class 4 shingles. There are more hail resistant to other types of shingles. I would imagine, I've never actually priced it out, but I imagine being more hail resistant, they're probably thicker, which means they're probably more expensive than other classes of shingles. But whether you live in hail-prone areas like Alberta, Calgary area, Edmonton area, or other parts of the country, considering using Class 4 shingles on your roof might save you from further headaches and heartache down the road. Because it's not just hail that can impact your roof. There's other debris that can be picked up by a windstorm. And I'm not just talking about tornadoes, just, high gust windstorms that pass through every area of Canada every now and then, that can pick up a tree branch, slam it into your roof. Obviously, if you have more resistant materials on your roof, then obviously it's better chance that it's not going to penetrate your roof, causing further damage to the interior of your home. So for people in Alberta, I'm sure you've already heard about this, have already considered this, have already planned for this if you can afford to. Not everyone can afford to upgrade their home to try and make them more resistant to hail. But obviously it's going to be a bigger issue in the future. I've already heard about some insurance companies who have decided not to offer any hail or windstorm coverage for certain areas. I believe it's the northeast part of Calgary. So this is those chickens are starting to come home to roost when it comes to issues with certain weather events in certain parts of the country. Obviously, water damage in other parts of the country are a concern as well, but hail in the prairie provinces is becoming an issue, and it's coming to a point where some insurance companies just decide to stop offering the coverage altogether, which could make it an even bigger headache for homeowners in those affected areas. Our last article looks at the Insurance Bureau of Canada's call for a national commercial truck database in an effort to try and combat some of the issues that commercial trucking has seen over the last couple of years, especially with claim situations that's caused the costs for trucking companies or insurance costs to skyrocket. So let's see what this article has to say. IBC backs for calls for national commercial truck database. The IBC, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, supports Manitoba's call for a national database on commercial trucking, saying improved oversight would enhance driver safety and ease pressures on insurance claims costs. The IBC lent its support to calls from the Manitoba government and Manitoba Trucking Association for the creation of a national commercial trucking database, which IBC says in a press release will also prevent further tragedies on Canada's roadways. In particular, MTA wants a national truck carrier registry and enhanced interprovincial data sharing. Following a recent fatal collision involving a previously decertified transport company in Brandon, Manitoba, the province's Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, Lisa Naylor, urged the federal government to take action. This includes a national database to help provinces better track safety certification and violations for commercial truck companies, vehicles, and drivers. A national carrier registry with stronger interprovincial data sharing would help regulators identify unsafe operators and stop them from resurfacing elsewhere. The IBC says in the release, insurers could also use this data to verify claims and infraction histories when assessing commercial insurance risk. And this has been an issue because obviously trucking registration is a provincial jurisdiction. And there have been cases in the past where a trucking company who becomes decertified in one province just sets up shop in the neighboring province, because obviously the neighboring province has no record of this particular company that's trying to set up shop, or the principals of that particular company, because they're coming over from a different province. So they just start operating in a new province, and I guess until they get decertified in that province, in which case they set up shop in a new province. So it only makes sense what Manitoba is putting forth and what the IBC is supporting in order to try and stop carriers, or stopping the bad apples from trying to do this by setting up shop in new provinces, else even though they've been kicked out from one particular province. Canadian underwriter system publication Truck News reported this latest incident relates to a problem the trucking industry has been warning governments about for years: chameleon carriers. A trucking carrier involved had previously lost its safety fitness certificate in Manitoba, only to re-emerge in Alberta under a slightly different name and continue operating. Early last week, Federal Transport Minister Steve McKinnon indicated the Government of Canada is prepared to support creation of a national database for trucking companies' certification, IBC reports. The IBC has long advocated that a national database of claims history and regulatory certifications for commercial truckers would help improve road safety, combat fraud, and support better informed insurance coverage and pricing across Canada's trucking sector, said Aaron Sutherland, Vice President for IBC's Pacific and Western Regions. In January 2024 public policy recommendation document improving the risk profile of commercial trucking in Canada, IBC advocated creation of a national database of trucking insurance and claims information to help verify each trucker's driving history and address fraud in the marketplace. The recommendation also requested stronger and more consistent driver training requirements across the country to reduce collision and improve accountability in the commercial trucking sector. The recent incident in Brandon, Manitoba occurred May 27th when a semi-truck driver allegedly ran a stop sign at highway speed, colliding with an SUV and claiming the life of its 49-year-old driver. The 35-year-old truck driver has been charged with dangerous driving causing death. The IBC reports the tragedy in Manitoba is just the latest in a long list of safety issues with commercial trucking across the country, including in BC, extensive reports of road safety concerns with 34 plus collisions involving previously decertified truckers hitting highway overpasses. In Alberta, alarming roadside safety failure rates with 92% of commercial vehicles failing inspections by the Alberta Sheriff, Highway Patrol, and Calgary Police. 92%, that's insane. That is insane. Charges laid and more than a dozen vehicles pulled out of service following a Ministry of Transportation blitz. The Provincial Auditor General also released a special report on commercial trucking in May that found large commercial trucks accounted for 12% of vehicles involved in fatal collisions in Ontario from 2019 to 2023, despite representing only 3% of vehicles on the road. That's another astounding statistic. Referencing a 2024 report by the MNP, IBC notes drivers who are undertrained and lacking appropriate qualifications continue to cause pressures in the insurance system that impact everyone. So, I mean, I would imagine, there's nothing here indicating in this article that any sort of trucking association is backing this particular call for this national database. I don't know why they wouldn't, because at this point, the commercial trucking industry needs to do something, because it just seems to just be getting worse and worse every year. You just see more and more stories about these sort of incidents, these sort of reports from police units, from inspection units across the country about these commercial trucks who fail inspections. So at this point, something definitely has to be done. The national database is a nice first step. It's not the end-all and be-all answer to solve this particular situation. I think maybe more stringent requirements for somebody to be licensed to operate one of these vehicles is a consideration that I think every province needs to review in order to improve safety on Canada's roads, and also to improve the situation with the commercial trucking industry in Canada, because keep in mind, we need the commercial trucking industry, and we also need to ensure that insurance remains affordable for this industry, because obviously these sort of costs ultimately gets passed on to the people who use these services, and gets passed on to the consumer of those companies that utilize these trucking companies to haul their goods across the country. So an interesting idea, and I hope that it gets advocated, it gets utilized, gets implemented sooner rather than later. And that is it for me for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like what I do here, please like and subscribe for more. Please share this video with others who you think might be interested in the information presented today. Make sure to follow Insurance in Canada on Twitter/X. And until next time, bye-bye.